1939. The outbreak of hostilities thrust the German U-boat arm into a conflict where it was often outmatched. By 1941, Germany found itself wagering everything on the submarine card. This was a strategic necessity born of an outmatched surface fleet against the formidable Royal Navy. For decades, the narrative of this war at sea has often been dominated by a handful of celebrated aces: Erich Topp, Engelbert Endras, Carl Friedrich Merton. These names became synonymous with the U-boat legend. But the true story is far broader. Almost 30,000 U-boat crewmen lost their lives in World War II alone. Their collective experiences and individual sacrifices often remained overlooked. In 1997, and again in a digital first edition in 2013, the book Silent Hunters intentionally shifted this focus. It aimed to provide a more nuanced and complete historical picture. The goal was to move beyond the romanticized myth of the few, giving voice to commanders whose unique or incremental achievements were previously obscured. It sought to replace stereotypes with more complex human portraits. Consider Engelbert Endras, remembered through Erich Topp's In Memoriam essay, or the stories of men like Carl Friedrich Merton, whose memoirs detail attacks on former comrades, Victor Owen, whose glory was often transferred to another, Ralph Kapitsky, who faced the grim certainty of never returning home, or Heinz Wilhelm Eck, whose name became synonymous with the Piraeus affair, one of the few U-boat war crimes to receive English-language coverage. These were the men who patrolled from bases like Kiel, Wilhelmshaven, Narvik, Trondheim, and the Bay of Biscay. They were the crews who, for example, were ordered to close in on a convoy northwest of Cape Finisterre. 10 boats in the vicinity of Group Endras sank 6 ships, but at the cost of 3 of their own to relentless escorts equipped with the latest weapons. This was the brutal reality of a war that involved thousands of men and boats, not just a handful of famous individuals. The real story of the U-boat war is found in the profound, transformative bonds of camaraderie forged in its crucible. These were connections that transcended superficial acquaintance, becoming a defining force in the lives of submariners. They were often expressed through acts of immense bravery and ultimately faced the stark reality of sacrifice. Shared danger and mutual dependence during intense combat situations, particularly depth charge attacks and near-fatal damage, cemented deep bonds of friendship that superficial social interactions simply could not. The impenetrable wall of U-boat life, long missions, constant alert, physical hardship, and the ever-present threat of death stripped away all superficialities, revealing the naked human being, the genuine comrade. It began with a shared ambition. Watching returning boats, a yearning for action, created a foundation. For the narrator, Carl Friedrich Merton, and his friend, Bertel Endras, it intensified. In October 1938, they were assigned to the Wegener flotilla, immersing themselves in what Merton called the dreamland that marked the world of submariners. The cramped conditions aboard the old hulk Hamburg, their accommodation ship, were a harsh teacher. Water condensed on overheated metal walls and dripped down if the heating system worked. At other times it failed completely, leaving everyone shivering in the icy cold. In summer, sun-baked walls heated the air inside to unbearable temperatures. These were the shared hardships that stripped away all pretense. Early in their shared experience, a near-fatal grounding incident forged an instantaneous understanding. A mighty gust caught the bulging mainsail and pushed them irresistibly toward the shore. The rudder, unable to withstand the pressure, broke in two. In that moment of immediate danger, the true nature of courage emerged, not a fake smile, but an honest acknowledgement of fear and vulnerability, seen in their shared pale faces. Upon completing their initial training, they made an oath to meet again in the U-boat branch. It was a conscious commitment to a shared future in this dangerous service. The impending international conflict only intensified these bonds, but the U-boat war was a meat grinder. Merton's close comrade, Klaus, was lost on a special mission near the Straits of Dover. It marked Merton's first profound encounter with the brutal loss inherent in U-boat warfare. His best friend, Bertel, the future Lieutenant Commander Endras, would also meet his fate. Bertel's war diary entries from June 6, 1941 detail a bombing attack. 10:45. Without warning, 3 aircraft prepare to make a bombing run. 10:48. Emergency dive. Aircraft dive from cloud cover. The first dropped 4 bombs. Boat's stern badly damaged. No. 5 torpedo tube flooded and leaking because outer cover and casing gone. Trim tank. No. 1 diving cell and watertight stern section also flooded. Merton described these moments of agony that add streaks of silver to a shock of blonde hair and drain all blood from one's face. 2 days later, Bertel's boat attacked and sank a tanker, then an armed steamship. On June 6, Bertel's boat had collided with a tanker while navigating storm-force seas. His diary recounts, "The tanker plows into us. No damage to the pressure hull, but neither of our 2 periscopes is working. We open distance a little, and surface. The hatch to the bridge is jammed and cannot be opened from the inside." These were the realities that created an almost superhuman level of trust and understanding. The joint operation of Merton's and Bertel's boats, hunting a convoy for 4 days and nights, was the high point of our U-boat careers. It was a 7,700-mile pursuit, the equivalent of the distance between Paris and Moscow. It was a testament to perfect operational harmony and deep personal connection. Bertel would be lost on his last patrol, confirming Merton's deepest fears upon his return from a new area of operations off the eastern seaboard of the United States. The lingering impact of this loss shaped Merton's perceptions of life, death, and the meaning of true friendship. Bertel was a distinguished commander, credited with sinking nearly 250,000 tons of enemy shipping. But his legacy, and that of all U-boat men, rests not just as warriors, but as profound human beings who understood responsibility, integrity, and the value of profound connection amidst existential threat. The story of Carl Friedrich Merton provides a deeper understanding of the German military tradition during World War II. Merton, though a top U-boat ace, was not the arrogant aristocrat of propaganda. Born in 1908 from middle-class origins, his path reflects a blend of idealism, duty, and professional detachment. At just 10 years old in April 1918, Merton chose his destiny, entering the Royal Prussian Cadet Institute. It was a direct pipeline to the military, graduating adolescence with an ingrained sense of discipline and duty inherited from generations of military service. The interwar years presented a Kagi and Neymer's unique challenge for the German Navy. The Treaty of Versailles severely restricted the Reichsmarine to 1,500 officers among 15,000 personnel. Competition was fierce. In 1926, out of 44,100 applicants, only 635 were accepted. From 6,000 officer applicants, a mere 104 survived final selection. Merton was among them, reporting to Kiel for officer candidate training on April 1, 1926. His early career was shaped by Germany's political turmoil. In January 1933, Hitler was nominated Chancellor. By 1934, the oath of loyalty to the German constitution was replaced by a personal oath to Hitler. In May 1935, the Navy was redesigned the Kriegsmarine. The Anglo-German naval agreement in June 1935 provided a deceptive sense of security, but the strategic wager on submarine warfare was already being laid. World War II began at 4:47 a.m. on September 1, 1939, when the Schleswig-Holstein fired the first shots against Westerplatte. Merton, then a surface officer, soon recognized the limitations of the conventional fleet. Germany's conquest of Norway, while a victory cost the Kriegsmarine 1 heavy cruiser, 2 light cruisers, and 10 destroyers sunk, with others severely damaged. Merton sought combat, and in May 1940, he reported to torpedo school. By September, he was at the U-boat base in Lorient, beginning his transition to the elite submarine arm. In February 1941, U-68 was commissioned, and Merton assumed command. It was a Type 1XC U-boat, a long-range workhorse with an 11,000-mile range. But it had its drawbacks. Slower to dive and more sluggish to handle than the smaller Type 7 boats. It was more vulnerable to convoy escorts. These characteristics demanded commanders like Merton. Patient, enduring with independent judgment. While only 12% of the U-boat fleet, Type 9Cs, accounted for 37% of all merchant sinkings, Donitz, the architect of the U-boat campaign, needed such commanders for his strategic gambles. On September 11, 1941, U-68 departed for distant South African waters, a bold, risky mission to surprise Allied shipping. Merton's command had an undistinguished start. His U-boats suffered a diesel engine breakdown and a near miss with HMS Clyde at Turriffle Bay. But his fortunes would turn. In September 1941, U-68, along with U-107, attacked convoy SL-87. Merton claimed 3 steamers, though post-war analysis would confirm only the 5,300-ton British steamer Silver Bell. He proved his prowess as a lone wolf commander. On October 22, he sank the 8,145-ton British oiler Darkdale off St. Helena. 5 days later, the 5,297-ton Hazeltide. And on November 1, the 4,953-ton Bradford City. During the attack on Bradford City, U-68 punched to the surface just 10 meters from the sinking target due to evasive maneuvers. Engine room temperatures could reach 140 degrees Fahrenheit, averaging 91 degrees. These conditions tested men to their limits. Merton's story provides a nuanced portrayal of the German officer corps. It challenges simplistic stereotypes, revealing a complex blend of idealism, duty, and professional detachment, which could be both admirable and tragically misguided. In the challenging theatre of war, U-boat effectiveness was not solely dictated by technological superiority or brute force. It was equally shaped by strategic adaptability, individual leadership, and at times a surprising adherence to humanitarian principles, even within the brutal context of total war. The initial successes of German commerce raiders, like the Atlantis, created a need for supply ships such as the Python, introducing vulnerable points into German logistics. When Atlantis was sunk on November 22, 1941, and Python soon after, it highlighted these inherent risks. Merton, aboard U-68, played a pivotal role in the longest-distance rescue operation of World War II. On December 1st, he linked up with Python and UA, encountering the 414 survivors of both ships. For 3 weeks, this historic rescue formation made the perilous journey back to France, Nazaire, on Christmas Eve. This feat underscored the resourcefulness and resilience of German crews in extreme circumstances. In February 1942, Merton's U-68 operated off West Africa, then in May and June, prowled the Caribbean. It was a highly successful period. On June 10th, U-68 had its closest brush with destruction from the detonating dynamite cargo of the SS Surrey, a 5,000-ton vessel that disintegrated with its entire crew. By June 14th, Merton received word of his Ritterkreuz. The Caribbean, in 1942, became a hunting ground with German submarines sinking over 350 ships due to the defenders' inexperience. In August 1942, Donitz ordered U-68 to join Gruppe Aspar for an operation off South Africa. By October 6, U-68 and U-172 entered the Cape Town area. Permission was granted to attack at discretion. In less than 27 hours, Merton dispatched 6 vessels. On November 6, 500 miles south of St. Emiles, Helena, Merton sank the SS City of Cairo. Crucially, despite the infamous Laconia order issued 2 months prior, Merton provided assistance to survivors. This act, generating unexpected goodwill from British survivors, challenged the perception of U-boat crews as purely ruthless. On November 17th, Merton was notified of the oak leaves to his Knight's Cross. He returned to Lorient on November 22, 1942, completing a 116-day patrol covering 17,600 miles. Merton ultimately sank 27 Allied merchant ships, totaling 170,248 tons in 5 patrols, ranking him among the top 6 U-boat aces of the war. But the war was turning. Allied code breaking, the breaking of U-boat codes, and the successful hunting of German tanker U-boats created critical logistical challenges. The May 1943 debacle saw 41 submarines sunk. A flawed German tactical shift, the fight back order, compelled U-boats to engage Allied aircraft on the surface instead of diving. This tragically contributed to the catastrophic failure of the 1943 Caribbean offensive. From April 1943 to March 1945, Metten commanded the 24th U-boat flotilla in Memel. Here, his Prussian tradition of loyalty and duty contrasted sharply with fanatical Nazi ideology. In July 1944, he ordered the evacuation of Hitler Youth teenagers. In August, his flotilla coordinated the evacuation of 50,000 civilians from Memel. Merton's post-war defense of his wartime actions and his nuanced interactions with critics and survivors reveal the enduring complexities of wartime morality and personal responsibility. He passed away on May 2nd, 1993. The U-boat offensive in the Caribbean during July and August 1943 became a brutal, technologically uneven, and ultimately futile endeavor. It highlighted the strategic overreach of the U-boats against overwhelming Allied air superiority and resource advantages. This period was a death trap for German submarines. Allied anti-submarine squadrons in the region had exploded. By August 1943, 21 squadrons operated between Puerto Rico and French Guiana, compared to just 3 in 1942. During July 1943, U-boats sank only 3 tankers, 2 freighters, and 2 schooners, at a frightful cost in return. Of the 22 U-boats committed to the offensive, 19 survived, but only 2 returned undamaged. At the heart of this futile struggle was the desperate, courageous, yet doomed defense of U-615 and its commander, Lieutenant Commander Ralph Kapitsky. Kapitsky, a former Luftwaffe pilot, had sailed U-615 from La Pallice on June 12, 1943, for the Caribbean. He had initially found success, sinking the Dutch tanker Rosalia on July 28. But the fight-back order proved catastrophic. German crews discovered they simply could not carry enough anti-aircraft ammunition to defend themselves against the non-stop relentless attacks from the air. U-615 had been modified with 2 single 20mm cannons and 2 twin MG-34 81Z machine guns. Theoretically, it could lay down a catastrophic barrage. But the machine guns were only effective at 300 yards or less, forcing gunners to wait under fire. On August 1st, U-615 received recall orders. Kapitsky, facing dwindling fuel and escalating dangers, had to decide how to break free. On August 5th, his periscope was sighted by the USS Biddle. Soon after, Lieutenant J.J. Ems Erskine, pilot of Mariner P-6, made initial radar and visual contact with U-615 on the surface. The hunt was on. At dawn on August 6th, Lieutenant A.R. Matuski, flying Mariner P-4, took over the search. He delivered a crippling depth charge attack. U-615 suffered severe damage, burst lubricating oil tanks, damaged stern glands, and a shorted starboard electric motor. With only one operable motor, the U-boat could manage just 2 knots. Around 1:30 p.m. that day, Kapitsky made a risky decision to surface and recharge batteries. Matusi attacked again. This time, U-615's anti-aircraft fire was effective. Mariner P-4 was shot down, a testament to the U-boat crew's tenacity. But the U-boat was critically wounded. At 3:30 p.m., Lieutenant L.D. Crockett, commander of VP-2 Hotro 4 and pilot of Mariner P-11, located U-615. An experienced pilot, Crockett now commanded the pursuit and engaged the crippled U-boat in a prolonged, brutal duel. A Harpoon bomb arrived, its 280-knot speed outpacing German tracer fire. Soon, a third Mariner, P-8, joined the coordinated attack. Kapitsky's battle became the largest anti-submarine operation against a single U-boat, diverting significant Allied air and surface assets. The tenacity of U-615 was extraordinary. It was Hamburg-built, a submarine considered exceptional. Despite its crippling damage, Kapitsky and his crew refused to surrender. The coordinated attack by 3 Mariner aircraft severely damaged U-615. Its rudder and aft diving planes were smashed by depth charges. Kapitsky himself was wounded by a 20mm shell in his upper thigh, and his gunner, Helmut Langder, was wounded in the knee. Despite his severe wound, Kapitsky continued fighting, eventually relinquishing command to his first watch officer, Schlipper. The U-boat became a besieged fortress. It endured multiple depth charge and bomb attacks, 13 in total. U-615 repeatedly used rain squalls and darkness to disappear, evading attacks from an ever-growing Allied force. At one point, 12 Mariner flying boats were overhead, joined by a UST, Navy airship K-68 and a B-18 bomber. This diversion created a temporary lull in Allied pressure on other withdrawing U-boats, allowing several to escape the Caribbean death trap. The U-boat's survival for so long, despite numerous direct hits, challenged Allied assumptions about U-boat vulnerability. The hunt for U-615 continued for 3 days, fueled by the Allied difficulty in accepting one U-boat's tremendous performance. They convinced themselves they were fighting multiple U-boats. But all fights must end. At 5:25 a.m. on August 8, 1943, U-615 fired a red flare, indicating surrender. It sank beneath the surface, down to 10,000 feet. 43 Germans were rescued by the USS Walker. One corpse, that of Helmut Langder, the wounded gunner, was recovered. The U-615 survivors were treated with courtesy by their captors, who recognized the U-boat's tremendous fight. Fritz Guggenberger, a Knight's Cross recipient, who famously sank HMS Ark Royal and would later rise to Rear Admiral, represents a contrasting figure. His career reflects the brutal effectiveness of early U-boat operations, but also highlights the individual battles of courage and resilience that defined the war at sea, even for less celebrated commanders like Kapitsky. Fritz Guggenberger's early naval career, marked by rigorous training and early assignments on older vessels, shaped his transition into the elite U-boat service. Born in 1915, he attended gymnasium, an elite secondary school from 1925 to 1934, commuting between Bad Mergentheim and Tauberbischofsheim. The Great Depression made a secure naval career appealing, influencing his decision to pursue officer training. He qualified for regular naval officer status and entered service on April 8, 1934, alongside 317 other cadets in Crew 34. This class included future U-boat aces like Eric Topp and Jochen Marr, forging bonds that would define their careers. After 3 months of basic infantry training and a nautical apprenticeship aboard the sailing vessel Gorch Fock, Guggenberger, like all his comrades, took a new service oath to Adolf Hitler on August 2, 1934. His midshipman's cruise was a 9-month voyage aboard the light cruiser Emden, circling Africa and venturing into the Indian Ocean. Significantly, Karl Donitz, the future U-boat leader, was the Emden's commanding officer. Guggenberger fell ill with malaria and typhus during this cruise, a foretaste of the hardships to come. After 9 months of theoretical training at the Marineschule Merwick, he ranked 13th out of 165 second lieutenants. Despite his ambition for the U-boat branch, Guggenberger was assigned as an instructor on the Emden from 1936 to 1938. This delay from frontline service was frustrating but provided valuable leadership and diplomatic experience. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 found the mood among officers somber and fatalistic. But it accelerated Guggenberger's path. By October 2, 1939, he was posted to U-boat Training Command in Neustadt. 8 weeks of familiarization with the weapon and 1 month of specialized training prepared him for the submarine war. On January 2, 1940, he began his first active patrol as first watch officer aboard U-28, a Type 7A U-boat. Built between 1936 and 1937, surfaced 745 submerged. It boasted a 16-knot surface speed and 8 knots underwater, was 215 feet long, armed with 5 torpedo tubes, an 88mm deck gun, and a 2cm anti-aircraft gun, carrying 11 torpedoes. Its range of 4,300 nautical miles at 12 knots was modest compared to later types. Under Commander Kuhnke, U-28 had already sunk 4 merchantmen totaling almost 25,000 tons by December 1939. Guggenberger's first patrol with U-28 involved minalaying in the Firth of Forth, then sinking the P. Margaronis and the U-Lota in March 1940. During this happy times of mid-1940, before Allied countermeasures improved, U-28 continued to find targets, sinking the Sarmatia, Adamandeos Georgiandis, and Prunella in June. It attacked convoys 6.1,HH.66, Steet, 2, and OA.210. Over the following months, sinking and damaging more ships. U-28's last patrol saw it torpedo the British steamship Matina. On October 26, 2 points, a 5 on October 26, 1940, a ship later finished. U-28 was recalled due to damage and harsh weather. Guggenberger officially took command of U-28 on November 10, 1940, though the boat remained in dock for 3 months. His new command, U-81, a Type 6 IC U-boat, was commissioned on April 26, 1941. It offered significant improvements over the 7A, with a range up to 6,500 nautical miles and stronger diesel engines providing a 17-knot surface speed. U-81's first 2 patrols in the summer of 1941 were in the North Atlantic, seeking Allied shipping to Murmansk and Archangel. Its second patrol, from August 27 to September 19, shifted operations further west. Here, U-81 participated in the intense engagement with convoy Skestot-42 from September 9 to 16, 1941. It was one of 10 U-boats that decimated the convoy, sinking 18 Allied ships, but the battle came at a cost. Guggenberger's Crew 34 comrade, Fritz Meyer, was lost with U-207. The war in the Atlantic was intensifying, with U-boats and American naval units already engaged in dangerous cat-and-mouse games even before Pearl Harbor. Eric Topp's U-552, for example, sank the U.S. destroyer Reuben James in late 1941, while individual U-boat commanders like Guggenberger achieved significant tactical successes. A strategic decision by Adolf Hitler would prove disastrous. In August 1941, Hitler, misjudging the overall conflict, ordered a speedier resolution of the Mediterranean situation. This led to the dispatch of German submarines from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. Both Admiral Donitz and Grand Admiral Erich Raeder objected strongly. They prioritized the Atlantic for its potential to bring Britain to its knees. But Hitler overrode their objections, insisting on the strategic shift. U-boat command itself would assess the Mediterranean as a mousetrap by December 1941. The Mediterranean presented formidable disadvantages for U-boats. British aircraft from bases in Gibraltar, Malta, and Egypt provided continuous surveillance. Subtropical weather and more transparent waters aided detection. There was restricted maneuvering space for wolf packs and logistical challenges from remote German bases. Navigation was hazardous due to minefields, and the Gibraltar bottleneck became tightly patrolled after November 1941, requiring moonless nights and exceptional skill for passage. 21 boats abandoned passage attempts, and 9 were sunk. Over 3 years, 64 Type 6 IC U-boats moved into the Mediterranean. None ever returned to Atlantic waters. 59 boats were sunk on patrol. At any given moment, rarely more than 20 U-boats were active in the Mediterranean. The tonnage sunk per boat in the Mediterranean averaged 7,300 tons compared to 28,700 tons in the Atlantic. These early Mediterranean successes, though celebrated, were ultimately flukes that masked the long-term strategic futility of this theatre for U-boats. Guggenberger's U-81 departed Brest for its first Mediterranean attempt on October 29, 1941. By November 10th, it stood before Gibraltar. 3 days later, on November 13, 1941, at 16:36, Guggenberger fired 4 torpedoes at Force K. The next morning, at 6:13, the 22,600-ton aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal sank. It was a significant tactical victory for U-81 and Guggenberger. He was awarded the Knight's Cross on December 10, 1941, and later the Oak Leaves Cluster in January 1943. Other U-boat successes followed, briefly validating Hitler's strategy. Hans-Dietrich Freiherr von Tiesenhausen aboard U-330-31 sank the battleship Barham. Ottokar Paulsen with U-557 sank the cruiser Galatea. Guggenberger himself, in April 1942, sank the French armed steam trawler Viking and the British tanker Caspia, and later in November the British vessel Garling and the British motor vessel Marin. But these individual victories could not change the strategic reality. The Mediterranean became a graveyard. The shift from tactical brilliance to strategic miscalculation highlights a recurring theme of misjudged war theatres. It was a costly diversion of vital U-boat assets from the decisive battle in the Atlantic. The U-boat war was a landscape of profound consequences, where seemingly small individual actions and technological limitations had profound, often tragic effects. It also highlights the often unseen role of staff officers in planning and executing major operations. In the early summer of 1942, Fritz Guggenberger, now in U-513, a Type 1XE U-boat, was operating in the South Atlantic. His initial successes were striking. On June 21, U-513 sank the Venezia. 4 days later, it damaged the American tanker Eagle. In July, U-513 sank the Tutolia, the Elihu B. Washburn, and the Liberty ship Richard Caswell. These victories, achieved in less defended waters, initially emboldened Guggenberger and suggested a strategic vulnerability for the Allies. But his extensive radio transmissions, reporting these successes, made U-513 easy to pinpoint. On July 19, 1942, U-513 was discovered and bombed by a USI Sumshenau, PBM Mariner. It was a fatal turning point for Guggenberger and highlighted the increasing Allied air superiority and intelligence capabilities. His friend and Crew 34 comrade, Hans-Werner Krauss, commander of U-199, would also succumb to air attack shortly after U-513 on July 31st. Meanwhile, the disastrous torpedo failures in the spring of 1940 had severely hampered German operations and led to a crisis of confidence. The primitive Pi 2 inches pistol, the torpedo's detonation mechanism, proved highly unreliable. This technical flaw forced the Kriegsmarine to re-evaluate its technology and morale, but it also presented an opportunity for officers like Victor Otto Auerhahn. Auerhahn, an early U-boat ace, would become a crucial A1, or Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, under Admiral Donitz. His story emphasizes the critical importance of staff work and planning, often overshadowing the frontline commanders who received public accolades. Auerhahn's career trajectory from frontline commander to pivotal staff officer demonstrates the crucial, often unacknowledged role of strategic thinking. He commanded U-14, a small 250-ton Type 2 boat known as an Einbaum, or canoe, and was instrumental in the development and refinement of the Rudel tactic, later known as the Wolfpack tactic. Auerhahn was the mastermind behind Gunther Preen's celebrated Scapa Flow raid. On October 13, 1939, Preen, following AAN's plan, sank HMS Royal Oak, resulting in nearly 900 men lost. It was a major propaganda victory, crucial for the U-Bootwaffe's survival and resource allocation. Later in the war, Guggenberger, now a prisoner of war, would once again demonstrate the resilience and strategic thinking of German U-boat commanders. From Papago Park, Arizona, he participated in elaborate escape attempts. In February 1944, he and August Maus were part of the first attempt. In December, a second, larger escape involved 25 officers and enlisted men via the False-Ball Tunnel, a 178-foot route. These escape attempts, while ultimately unsuccessful, revealed the organizational capabilities and unwavering resolve of German U-boat officers, even in defeat. Guggenberger's post-war life would be tragically cut short. The lasting psychological and physical scars of war took their toll. His wedding band, the sole identifying item on his recovered remains, was a stark reminder of the profound, transformative bonds he had forged in the crucible of war, and the ultimate cost of his service. Victor Auerhahn, while initially hailed as a U-boat hero, represents a complex figure whose personal narrative reveals the brutal realities, moral ambiguities, and shifting fortunes of the U-boat war. His story ultimately highlights the critical importance of strategic thinking and intelligence over individual exploits. In April 1940, the U-Bootwaffe faced a collapse of morale, exacerbated by torpedo malfunctions and Allied successes. There was a desperate need for heroic figures. Auerhahn's first war patrol in U-37, despite initial setbacks with torpedoes, was a resounding success. He returned to Wilhelmshaven on June 9, 1940. Having sunk 10 ships for 41,000 gross registered tons, it provided a much-needed boost to U-boat morale and media attention, establishing him as a nascent hero. Wolfgang Luth, commander of U-9, had completed a patrol before Auerhahn, challenging Auerhahn's initial claim to fame, but his success was undeniable. However, Auerhahn's second patrol revealed the moral tightrope of naval warfare. On August 23, 1940, he sank the Seven Lay, A near order to sink lifeboats could have made Owen a war criminal. He confronted the harsh realities of military reasons, potentially overriding humanitarian concerns. By the end of October 1940, Donitz relieved Owen of command of U-37. Warhorn had sunk a total of 24 ships for 104,000 gross registered tons across 3 patrols, earning him the Knight's Cross. But Donitz's need for experienced staff officers at this critical juncture led to Owen's reassignment from combat to operational planning as A1, or Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. He reported to Donitz's new headquarters at Kerneville on October 27th. This was a period of profound strategic shifts. Hitler's decision to shift U-boat focus to the Mediterranean, against Donitz's strategic judgment, created new operational and administrative complexities. Crucially, while Owen was in his operational roles, devastating intelligence losses occurred. In May 1941, Fritz Julius Lemp's U-110 was sunk, and vital Enigma machines and codebooks were captured. This fundamentally altered the balance of the Battle of the Atlantic, enabling the British to decipher U-boat radio signals, a fact largely unknown to the German command. The surrender of U-570 in August 1941, a command lapse by Hans-Joachim Ramlow, further compounded these losses. These events marked a significant turning point in the Allies' ability to counter U-boat operations. In May 1942, Owen transferred to Libya as a liaison officer to Erwin Rommel, the charismatic field marshal, whose advance he greatly admired. But his combat days were not over. On July 13, 1942, Owen departed for Rommel's headquarters and was severely injured in a desert battle, subsequently captured. He regained full senses in an Egyptian hospital on August 28. His prolonged recovery and unexpected interactions with British doctors fundamentally shifted his perspective and role in the war. His fiancée, Renate von Winterfeld, began persistent efforts to locate and contact Owen in captivity, facilitated by the Catholic Church. Her determination reignited his will to survive and escape. By the fall of 1943, Owen was recommended for repatriation and sent to the Mahdi Interrogation Center. His personal journey from decorated commander to severely wounded prisoner, and his eventual repatriation, highlights the human cost of war and the unpredictable turns of fate. Victor Owen's release from captivity in October 1943 and his subsequent arrival in Berlin in November, where he married Renate von Winterfeld, placed him back into the heart of a war that was already lost. As a confidant to Admiral Donitz, he offered a rare voice of reason within an increasingly detached command structure, now operating from Lager Koralle, outside Berlin. The war at sea had shifted. Allied air superiority and effective radar had rendered U-boat tactic, like the Rudel tactic, obsolete. Germany's strategic wager on the U-boat had failed. Donitz, increasingly isolated from his operational forces, was immersed in a sycophantic staff, contributing to unrealistic decision-making. This period saw the grim culmination of the war's good versus evil rhetoric. It would directly influence the Allied approach to war crimes trials after World War II, leading to often harsh judgments. The narrative of Heinz Wilhelm Eck, captain of U-852, serves as a cautionary tale about the application of Siegerjustiz. Eck's mission departing Kiel on January 18th. Departing Kiel on January 18th of 1944 for Penang with Grouper Monsoon was fraught with danger. U-852 was among the largest, slowest, and most easily hit U-boats then in service. All 4 Type 9D2 boats that had preceded U-852 had been lost. Veteran U-boat commanders like Adalbert Schnee and Gunther Hessler, Donitz's son-in-law and chief of staff, briefed Eck on the dangers of the Freetown Ascension Island line. On March 13, 1944, at 5 p.m., U-852 sighted the Greek-registered freighter SS Peleus. At 1940 hours, U-852 attacked and sank the 6,659 gross registered ton vessel. 35 men were in the crew. This incident would become the central event leading to Eck's trial and execution, serving as a stark example of how U-boat captain actions were scrutinized and judged. The Laconia Order, issued on September 17, 1942, which restricted U-boat rescue operations, underscored the brutal realities of a war where humanitarian concerns were often overridden by operational necessity. In the spring of 1945, As the war drew to a close, Ernie, now a planner for Donitz, provided comments on his commander-in-chief's last order of the day. On May 5th, Donitz made his final radio transmission to his boats. He would later be released from Spandau prison in 1956, passing away in 1981. But for Heinz Eck, the war crimes trials would lead to a different fate. The prevailing sentiment was that some soldiers were treated much more harshly than they deserved. The reality of both wars, as many recognized, differed considerably from the rhetoric. The prosecution and conviction of U-852's crew for the sinking of the Peleus and its survivors highlights a critical shift in the legal interpretation of war crimes. It was a clash between operational necessity and adherence to outdated prize rules, set against the evolving realities of unrestricted submarine warfare. After the Peleus sank on March 13, 1944, Captain Eck made a fateful decision to destroy wreckage and rafts. He believed it was an operational necessity to eliminate evidence and avoid detection by Allied aircraft. He spent nearly 5 hours on scene, using machine guns and hand grenades to destroy the wreckage. His chief engineer, Lenz, who knew the sounds of grenades, personally fired at a raft. Matrosona Bergfreiter Wolfgang Schwender was ordered to fire, but his gun jammed. 4 survivors were left on 2 rafts. At 1 a.m., on March 14th, Eck departed, believing his actions had succeeded, but the evidence trail quickly emerged. Eck sent a radio message about the Peleus sinking on March 15th, which was picked up by British radio direction finding. His position was further fixed on April 4th, after he broadcast success in torpedoing the 5,277-ton freighter SS Dabami. On April 20th, the 3 Peleus survivors, including Chief Officer Antonius Liasus, were rescued by the Portuguese steamer SS Alexandra Silva 35 days after the sinking. They provided crucial testimony. On May 2, 1944, RAF Wellingtons found U-852 and attacked. 2 days later, U-852 was beached off the Somaliland coast at Ras Hafun and its crew captured. They arrived in Cairo on May 17th, and 12 individuals were immediately separated for interrogation. British and American intelligence officers, Lieutenant Burnett and Lieutenant J.T. Roux, pieced together the evidence. By May 23rd, Roux telegrammed the Admiralty, confirming U-852 as the submarine responsible. On June 7th, the Peleus survivors signed sworn affidavits in Cape Town. On October 6, 1945, Eck and 4 crewmen were formally charged with war crimes in Hamburg. The trial opened on October 17th. They faced 2 charges, sinking the Peleus in violation of war laws and killing crew members. The prosecution's case was built on these affidavits and the captured war diary. The defense, however, was severely hampered. Attorneys were given only 3 days to review documents, and Dr. Go for days to review documents. Pabst, for instance, received just 1 book on international law the night before the trial. Hearsay evidence was allowed, and affidavits were admitted without opportunity for cross-examination. The charges themselves were problematic. They were initially based on World War I-era prize rules, which no longer applied to World War II submarine warfare. The case highlighted the fundamental tension between these outdated laws and the brutal realities of modern unrestricted submarine warfare. Allied operational necessity examples, such as British destroyers firing on German survivors of the Erich Giza, or American actions during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea and involving the USS Wahoo, all justified by similar claims, exposed a stark double standard. The legal defense in the Heinz Eck trial hinged on establishing that destroying wreckage was an operational necessity under the evolving norms of warfare and not an intent to murder survivors. The prosecution, however, aimed to prove Eck's actions were a direct intent to kill, regardless of any justification. Defense counsel Dr. Todson attempted to introduce precedents for attacking survivors during World War I, citing the Baralong affair. In September 1915, the British Q-ship HMS Baralong destroyed U-27, then hunted down and killed survivors. Another incident involved the ramming of U-41's lifeboat by the renamed Waiada. But Todson's attempt was met with a prosecutorial bluff, revealing a lack of preparedness by the defense to support such a claim with evidence, and the argument was dropped. Captain Eck's actions were central to the prosecution's case. His prolonged attack on rafts, his explanation of operational necessity driven by air threat and potential radio transmitters, and his use of hand grenades after machine guns failed were all scrutinized. Eck recounted the Laconia affair of September 1942, where U-156 under Werner Hartenstein was attacked by an American B-24 bomber piloted by Lieutenant James D. Hardin while attempting to rescue survivors of the torpedoed liner. Commander Robert C. Richardson III had ordered the attack. Eck argued that Allied military reasons could supersede humanitarian concerns for survivors. He also stated, "If we are influenced by too much sympathy, we must also think of our wives and children who at home die as the victims of air attack." But Colonel Howells, the prosecutor, was relentless. He precisely chose words, exploiting the ambiguity of the German word Überrest, meaning wreckage or remains. Eck had said he wished to destroy the remainder of the sunken ship. Howells used this to imply that Überrest could also encompass survivors. The judge advocate's intervention, with pointed questions, actively shifted the narrative towards murder. Howells asked Eck, "When you said that you regretted your decision, was that not a reference to a decision to kill survivors?" The defense for the other defendants relied on the doctrine of superior orders. Disobeying orders in the German Navy under Article 76 was a capital offense, punishing but not by death. This made Eck's operational necessity plea even more vital. If his actions were justified, then their obedience was lawful. A key defense witness was Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, a decorated U-boat commander. He initially bolstered the defense, suggesting that destroying wreckage was a recognized method to prevent detection. He testified that debris could be recognized from the air for several days, but under cross-examination the judge advocate and Colonel Howells broke him. The judge advocate asked Schnee, "Would it not have been much safer for you and your boat to clear out as soon as possible?" He then pressed Schnee, "When you said that you regretted your decision, was that not a reference to a decision to kill survivors?" Schnee eventually conceded, stating he would not have done what Eck did if he had kept his nerve. He admitted he had not seen a raft destroyed by machine gun fire, nor had he tried it himself. Schnee's testimony, ultimately, weakened Eck's defense considerably. The trial was about establishing a higher standard than following orders, particularly when those orders were potentially illegal. The trial of Heinz Eck and his crew was a deeply problematic intersection of wartime expediency, shifting international law, Allied propaganda, and the concept of victor's justice, or Siegerjustice. It obscured a more nuanced understanding of wartime actions. The closing arguments saw the defense attempt to establish alternative legal precedents, citing World War I cases like the Dover Castle case and the Caroline case, and arguing for the doctrine of superior orders. But the prosecution focused on the 1921 German Landwehr Castle trial, which had ruled that firing on survivors was illegal, and subordinates obeying such orders were liable. They asserted Eck's actions were cold-blooded murder. Despite arguments of poor judgment or following orders, the three men at the heart of the decision, Heinz Eck, August Hoffmann, and Walter Weisbenig, were condemned to death by firing squad. The executions took place on November 30th beneath Senk, 1945 at Hamburg's prison. Chief Engineer Lenz received a 5-year prison sentence and Wolfgang Schwender 1 year. These sentences, particularly the death penalties, represented the harsh application of victor's justice. Allied loathing of Nazi atrocities, particularly those in Eastern Europe, clouded objectivity. It led to a broad condemnation of all German actions as Nazi barbarity, making fair adjudication difficult. The trial exemplified the concept of Siegerjustice, where the victors imposed their will and interpretation of law on the vanquished, often fueled by wartime propaganda and a desire for retribution. The usages of war had demonstrably changed during World War II. Both Allies and Germans engaged in actions that killed civilians and non-combatants, often justified as operational necessities. The open reporting of Allied actions, like the slaughter of Japanese survivors in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea and the tacit approval of killing German shipwreck survivors, signaled a fundamental, albeit brutal, shift in accepted wartime conduct. The text posits that even if Eck and his crew were guilty of poor judgment or breaking German law, Their actions might not have constituted a war crime under the evolving, brutal realities of World War II. The fundamental question of their guilt remains ambiguous, subject to historical interpretation. The Peleus affair stands as a stark reminder of the moral ambiguities and harsh realities of total war, and the often uncomfortable truths of how history is written and justice is applied in its aftermath. The stage was set for the Peleus affair trial, a pivotal moment in legal history. Heinz Eck, the U-boat captain, stood accused. His unrealistic decision to destroy all traces of the sinking was at the heart of the matter. The prosecution, led by Colonel Halsist, prepared to make its case. Hals would effectively use cross-examination to expose contradictions. This was particularly damaging for Hoffman and Lenz. The trial itself commenced long after the fateful day. The Peleus was sunk on March 13, 1944, decides, but justice would begin its slow grind in October 1945. The central precedent, the Llandovery Castle case, from July 1921, Pola 6, loomed large. It had established that firing on the boats was an offence against the law of nations, and that subordinates were liable if they knew the order infringed international law. This was a heavy burden for the accused. The defence counsels faced an uphill battle. Professor Wegner, an expert on international law, argued for Eck. His arguments about the changing usages of war were somewhat rambling. He invoked the principle of law enacted before his deed. This suggested individuals couldn't be war criminals without a pre-existing law. Dr. Tar, Papst Ustasig defended de Weispennig, Hoffmann, and Schwender. He attempted to argue for categories of manslaughter over murder. And, crucially, the principle of superior orders, Major Lemon, counsel for Lenz, highlighted the soldier's impossible position. Disobeying orders could lead to death for a serviceman. Dr. Tupar, Todson differentiated the Llandovery Castle case. He argued for Eck's perceived operational necessity in destroying evidence. Even Adalbert Schnee, a former U-boat ace, testified for the defense. He described his probable actions in a similar dire situation. The defendant's own testimonies proved problematic. Gordist Hoffmann, a young officer, contradicted himself repeatedly. He ultimately admitted to firing and throwing hand grenades. Chief Engineer Hans Lenz objected to Eck's plan out of sympathy, yet he then took the gun, justifying it as a matter of honor. This justification the court found absurd. Walter Weispennig, doctor, presented an impossible-to-defend case. His crime was taking up arms, a clear violation of his non-combatant status. Wolfgang Schwender had the easiest defense. He claimed he only fired one burst before the gun was taken from him. Evidence included affidavits from 3 Peleus survivors. The defense questioned why they weren't brought to court. The defense also utilized other precedents. The Caroline case, 1837, argued individuals under government orders weren't answerable for crimes. The Dover Castle case, 1921, Dartwell, where torpedoing a hospital ship under orders led to an acquittal. This implied an acceptance of the superior orders principle, or so the defense hoped. Yet, the Laconia affair of September 12, 1942, billomed large over these arguments. Billomed bat-capped. Werner Hartenstein had rescued survivors. But a subsequent Allied bomber attack led directly to Donitz's fateful order. This new order explicitly forbade survivor rescue, tragically altering the rules of engagement. It became a direct basis for war crimes charges against Admiral Donitz himself. The incident starkly illustrated the brutal realities influencing such decisions. Instances like the Bismarck C. Miska's slaughter, openly reported by the American press. They showed thousands of Japanese survivors killed, indicating a shift in wartime rules. The verdicts came swiftly after the longest day of the trial, October 20, 1945. That day had seen the closing arguments. All defendants were found guilty on all counts. Death by firing squad was the sentence for Eck, Hoffmann, and Weispennig. Life imprisonment was handed to Lenz. Schwender received 15 years. Field Marshal Montgomery confirmed the sentences on November 12, 1945, and on November 30, 1945, Eck, Hoffmann, and Weispennig were executed. But the story didn't end there for everyone. Schwender was released in 1951, Schwender in 1952. Both after sentence reductions, lingering doubts persist to this day. Mysterious deaths of defense counsel Pabst and Todson fueled conspiracy theories, and former German naval officers continue to debate Eck's guilt. The Peleus affair, though unique, reflects the harsh realities of the U-Boot-Waffe. The effectiveness of German U-boat operations was often inflated. Exaggerated claims from commanders masked underlying technical limitations, and a growing Allied countercapability. Commanders like Endras reported sinking a 90,000-ton tanker on June 6, 1941. Post-war analysis showed he sank the British freighter Travarak, 5,270 tons, and damaged the tanker Ensis, 6,207. A significant difference. Night attacks and a lack of independent verification directly led to these inflated claims. Technical flaws were rampant, like the unreliable Pi 2-inch torpedo pistol. Sometimes gunfire, as used by Endras to sink the Phidias, was a necessary backup. Despite this, individual bravery was undeniable. Astapis earned third place among World War II P-aces, sinking 181,754 tons of shipping, including the old four-stacker destroyer Reuben James system on October 31, 1941, an early violation of American neutrality. But their impact was ultimately constrained by strategic miscalculations. Admiral Karl Donitz, the head and soul of the German submarine service, faced immense pressure. His leadership saw shifts, like becoming Kriegsmarine Commander-in-Chief on January 30, 1943. Yet the tide was turning. U-boats in the Caribbean operated alone, not in wolf packs. They were clustered near heavily defended convoy terminals. A significant strategic misstep. Trinidad, by 1943, became a formidable naval hub. Nas Chaguaramas housed multiple flying boat and anti-submarine squadrons, with 16 runways and up to 700 airplanes in operation. It was a death trap. June 14, 1943, Dublin saw multiple U-boats attacked by Coastal Command aircraft in the Bay of Biscay. The psychological toll was immense. Ralph Kapitsky's diary entry starkly captured a combat moment. Suddenly all hell breaks loose. Everything blows up. The sky is a sea of flames from which glowing parts are raining. I have been thrown into the back of the conning tower. I order everyone under deck and make off at full speed. Then up again, but there is nothing to be seen. The vessel and all lifeboats are gone. Only now I realize that my right arm does not move. My shoulder has been hit by a fragment. This visceral account underscores the immense personal cost. Beyond individual fates, the U-boat war's legacy endures. Take U-505, a Type I, a Type 1 XE U-boat, described as bulky and slow-diving, less suited for convoy work than the agile Type CIs. Its complex 3-year wartime history ended on June 4, 1944, during its final engagement. Commander Peter Zieszek committed suicide. This desperate act happened in the control room. Harold Langgage was its commander on that fateful day. It was audaciously captured by Daniel V. Galleries, Task Group 22.3. A pivotal event, providing invaluable intelligence to the Allies. Galleries' crew secured the boat, preventing its scuttling. This intelligence revolution significantly impacted the remainder of the Battle of the Atlantic. Today, U-505 is a popular exhibit at Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. It draws hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. Its preservation was not guaranteed. Politics, money, and egos nearly doomed it. It was nearly destined to become a target for American artillery practice. Keith R. Gill, curator and author, was crucial in its journey. The museum has finally solved its preservation dilemma. By moving the boat indoors, its future is secured. U-505 now stands as a tangible connection to the Battle of the Atlantic, a silent testament to the human experience of total war.